Birds once darkened the sky for hours. Mammals looked so strange they seemed invented. Island creatures never learned to fear us. Now all that remains is a single frame of film, a grainy photograph, or seconds of silent movement from a world that vanished the moment cameras arrived. These images are impossible because they do not show prehistory. They show memory ending. Number 28. The passenger pigeon. This bird was once so abundant that one flock recorded in the 19th century was said to stretch for hundreds of kilometers, with billions of wings beating overhead like weather. Passenger pigeons moved in vast, fast rivers of life across eastern North America, nesting in such dense colonies that branches snapped under their weight. If you have ever seen a city square full of pigeons, imagine that multiplied beyond counting. But their abundance became their weakness because commercial hunters, railroad expansion, and telegraph lines turned a wild marvel into an industrial harvest. By the late 1800s, the giant flocks had broken apart. The last known wild bird was shot in Ohio in 1900. The final captive individual, Martha, died on September 1, 1914, at the Cincinnati Zoo. Her photograph shows a neat blue-gray bird on a perch. Ordinary at first glance, which is part of what makes it hurt. The moral is quiet and severe. Even the most numerous bird on Earth can disappear when people mistake abundance for safety. Number 27. The Thylacine. It looked like a dog painted with tiger stripes, but it was a marsupial carrying its young in a pouch. Thylacines once lived across Australia and New Guinea, but by modern times they survived only in Tasmania, where they hunted at night with a stiff-tailed, deliberate gait that still looks eerie on film. European settlers blamed them for killing sheep, and therefore the Tasmanian government paid bounties for dead animals from 1888 to 1909. Habitat pressure and disease may have worsened the collapse, but the killing campaign did the main work. The last confirmed wild thylacine was shot by farmer Wilf Batty in May 1930 at Mabana. The final captive animal died at Hobart Zoo on September 7, 1936. You may have seen the footage. The animal paces, turns, and opens its jaws in a wide yawn that feels almost human in its exhaustion. Yet the question remains. People still report striped shapes in the Tasmanian bush, and some believe a few survived longer than the record admits. Others are not convinced. Either way, the image remains one of extinction's most haunting moving portraits. Number 26. The Quagga. Imagine a zebra that seemed to fade into a horse. The Quagga had bold stripes on its head and neck, but a plainer brown body behind, as if two animals had been joined together. It roamed the grasslands of South Africa in herds, part of the great grazing communities of the Cape. But Dutch settlers and later colonial hunters killed quaggas for meat and hides, and they also cleared rangeland for livestock. Therefore, a form that had once blended into the wider zebra world was pushed into a rapid 19th century collapse. The last wild quagga was probably killed in the late 1870s. The final captive individual died on August 12, 1883, at the Natura Artis Magistra Zoo in Amsterdam. Her photograph shows her standing side-on, calm and still, offering the world one last clear look at a pattern no camera would ever record alive again. Here's the twist. Modern genetics showed the quagga was not a separate species, but a distinct southern population of plains zebra. That discovery led to breeding efforts in South Africa to recreate the quagga's appearance, though not the original animal itself. Number 25. The Great Auk. This was a northern seabird that stood upright like a small penguin, though it was unrelated and evolved in the North Atlantic. Great auks were superb swimmers and awkward on land, gathering in dense breeding colonies on remote rocky islands from Canada to Iceland and beyond. Their bodies were built for water, with short wings used like flippers beneath the surface. But because they could not fly, sailors and hunters found them easy to catch. They were killed for meat, oil, and feathers, and museum demand for skins and eggs finished many of the last survivors. The final confirmed pair was killed on June 3, 1844, on Eldey Island off Iceland. One account says the birds were strangled while an egg was crushed under a boot. The last images are not photographs but preserved skins and illustrations made from the dead, which tells you how close extinction came to arriving before photography could properly witness it. The moral close is simple. Sometimes humanity erased a species just before it learned how to remember it. Number 24. The Carolina parakeet. North America once had its own native parrot, bright green with a yellow head and orange face. These birds moved through bottomland forests and swamps of the eastern United States in noisy flocks feeding on seeds and fruit, and they may have been unusually tolerant of toxic cockleburs that other animals avoided. If you picture a parrot in the United States today, you are probably picturing an escapee. This one belonged there, but forests were cleared for farms, feathers fed the hat trade, and farmers shot the birds as crop pests. Their flocking instinct made the slaughter worse because when one bird fell, the others often circled back. The last widely accepted wild record came from Okeechobee County, Florida, in the early 1900s. The final captive bird, named Incas, died at the Cincinnati Zoo on February 21, 1918. His photograph is startling because he looks tropical, vivid, and impossible against the story of American extinction. What happened next was not what anyone expected. For decades, scattered reports continued from southern swamps, but no proof ever held. Number 23. The heath hen. It was a chicken-sized bird of scrubby coastal grasslands, famous for the strange, booming displays males made on their mating grounds. Heath hens once lived from New England to Virginia, but by the late 19th century they survived only on Martha's Vineyard. Protection helped briefly, and numbers rose to around 2,000 by 1916. Then disaster came in layers: fire, severe winter weather, predation by goshawks, and disease after domestic turkeys were introduced, all struck the same small population. Therefore, recovery reversed into collapse. The last individual, a male called Booming Ben, was seen on March 11, 1932, near his traditional display ground on Martha's Vineyard. There is no famous final photograph of him alone, but earlier images and films of captive and wild heath hens have become the visual stand-in for that lonely end. Yet the question remains, if even a protected remnant can vanish after one run of bad years, how many species today are living closer to that edge than we think? Number 22. The Caspian Tiger. It was one of the largest cats on Earth, heavy-shouldered and pale-striped, moving through river forests, reed beds, and cold winter landscapes from Turkey to Central Asia. This tiger was built for extremes. It could stalk wild boar in dense cover and survive bitter climates far from the tropical image many people associate with tigers. But Russian imperial expansion and later Soviet agricultural campaigns destroyed its habitat, drained wetlands, and wiped out prey. Tigers were also shot directly in military-backed eradication drives. By the 1950s, they had vanished from most of their range. The last generally accepted records come from the 1960s near the Sirdarya region, with a final confirmed sighting often placed in southeastern Turkey in 1970. The last photographs show captive animals in zoos, powerful but already disconnected from the landscapes that made them possible. Here is the hope twist. Genetic work suggests the Caspian tiger was extremely close to the Amur tiger, and that has shaped modern proposals to return tigers to parts of Central Asia. Number 21. The Japanese sea lion. Adult males carried a thick neck mane and could reach more than 2 meters in length, hauling out on rocky coasts around Japan and Korea. They were agile in cold seas and once common enough to support local hunting traditions and later commercial exploitation. But that hunting intensified in the late 19th and early 20th centuries for oil, skins, and body parts. Military activity and industrial fishing likely deepened the decline by disrupting breeding grounds and food supply. Numbers crashed so far that by the 1940s the species was nearly gone. The last reliable records come from the early 1950s, with one of the final documented sightings in 1951 near Lioncourt Rocks. The photographs we have show animals in captivity and on shore, thick-bodied and watchful, with none of the drama we now attach to them. Some believe small groups survived at sea for years after the official record ended. Others are not convinced. In marine extinctions, silence is often the hardest thing to interpret. Number 20. The Atlas bear. This may have been Africa's only native bear in historical times, living in the forests and mountains of North Africa. Ancient writers described bears in the Atlas region, and later records suggest a dark, sturdy animal surviving into the modern era. You may not expect a bear from Africa at all, which is exactly why its disappearance feels so unreal. But forests were reduced, Roman capture for spectacles had a deep early impact, and later persecution finished the scattered survivors. The final accepted records place the last Atlas bears in Morocco in the 19th century, with extinction likely by the 1870s. No undisputed photograph exists, which gives this entry a different kind of sadness. The last image may be absent because the animal vanished before anyone thought it needed preserving. The moral close is that extinction does not always leave a portrait. Sometimes it leaves a gap in memory. Number 19. The bluebuck. This antelope had a dusky coat that may have carried a bluish sheen in life, though museum skins faded and left later generations guessing. It lived in a restricted part of South Africa's southwestern Cape, grazing open grasslands and herds long before colonial settlement transformed the region. Its problem was not weakness, but small range. Therefore, when livestock farming spread, habitat shrank fast and hunting pressure hit hard. By the late 1800s, the bluebuck was already gone from the wild, and it may have vanished before 1800. The last known specimens survive only as mounted skins and bones in museums in Europe. There is no photograph of a living bluebuck, only the aftermath of a species erased before photography matured. Yet the story gets strange. For years, even scientists confused bluebuck remains with those of related antelope, showing how extinction can continue in the archive long after it ends in the field. Number 18. The Two-Lake Wallaby. This was a wallaby of southeastern Australia with an almost delicate elegance. Slim-faced, long-tailed, and known for speed and grace. Early accounts describe a soft gray-brown coat and a remarkably refined build, more like a creature drawn from memory than a common marsupial. It lived in open country and scrub, but European settlement changed those landscapes quickly. Hunting, habitat conversion, and predators such as foxes drove the species down. By the 1920s, it was already disappearing across South Australia and Victoria. The last confirmed wild capture is often dated to the early 1930s, and the final accepted sighting came in South Australia later that decade. A surviving photograph of a captive animal shows a poised creature looking almost too slight for the hard fate that followed. The mystery twist is that remote districts were poorly surveyed for years, so some people believed it lasted longer than the official timeline. No proof ever emerged. Number 17. The Crescent Nail-Tail Wallaby. It had a stiff tail tipped with a tiny horny spur, a strange little feature that sounded like folklore until people saw it for themselves. These wallabies once ranged across arid and semi-arid Australia, sheltering by day and feeding at night. They were not giants, but they were part of a richer mammal world that modern Australia has largely lost. But foxes, cats, grazing pressure from sheep and rabbits, and habitat change combined brutally. Therefore, the decline moved fast across the 20th century. The last confirmed records are from Central Australia in the 1950s, and the species was declared extinct in the late 20th century after repeated surveys failed. The final photographs show a neat, alert animal in captivity, with the odd little nail on the tail now carrying almost all of its living identity. The moral is larger than one species. Extinction often begins with small pressures that together become absolute. Number 16. The Schomburgk's deer. This deer from central Thailand had antlers so elaborate that males looked crowned with floating branches. During the wet season, they likely took refuge on higher ground, as floodplains filled, then spread across open country when waters fell. It was a deer shaped by seasonal rhythm, but rice cultivation expanded, wetlands were drained, and heavy hunting for meat and antlers intensified. By the early 20th century, wild herds were gone. The last confirmed wild individual was killed in the 1930s, and the final captive animal reportedly died in 1938. Photographs of living animals are rare, but they show an elegant deer with remarkable antlers that seem almost too ornate to be real. Here is the twist. A pair of antlers found decades later sparked rumors that the species had survived unseen in Laos. The evidence never became solid, but the possibility stayed alive because some extinctions leave just enough doubt to resist closure. Number 15. The sea mink. This was not just a large mink. It was a coastal specialist of the northeastern Atlantic shore of North America, probably bigger than the American mink and tied to rocky islands, tidal zones, and marine food. Imagine a predator shaped partly by the sea itself. Archaeological remains show it had lived along that coast for thousands of years, but the fur trade valued its pelt, and island populations offered little room to retreat. By the late 19th century, it had disappeared. The last accepted records are vague because the species was not fully recognized until after it was gone, but extinction likely came in the 1880s. No living photograph survives. The real mystery is different. Much of what we know was reconstructed later from bones, skins, and old descriptions, reminding you that humans sometimes fail to notice a species clearly until they have already ended it. Number 14. The laughing owl. Its call was described as a strange rising sound that some heard as laughter, giving this New Zealand owl one of the most unforgettable names in ornithology. It hunted on the ground more than many owls do and lived among open country, rocky areas, and forest edges. Early settlers and museum collectors found it remarkable, but admiration did not protect it. Introduced predators such as cats, stoats, and rats struck hard, while habitat change added pressure. Numbers fell through the late 19th century. One of the last generally accepted specimens was found dead in Canterbury in 1912, though scattered reports continued afterward. Photographs of captive birds survive, and they show a long-legged owl with a direct, unsettling gaze. Yet the question remains. New Zealand has produced a few astonishing rediscoveries, so the laughing owl lingered in rumor for years after evidence had gone cold. Number 13. The huia. Few birds have ever displayed a more extraordinary pair bond in anatomy. The male and female had completely different bill shapes. The male short and sturdy, the female long and curved, each adapted to feeding in a slightly different way. This striking New Zealand bird moved through North Island forest with white-tipped tail feathers prized far beyond its ecological role. If you have ever heard of a feather carrying social status, this is one of the clearest examples. But that value became fatal. Hunting for feathers, habitat loss, and introduced predators drove a rapid fall. The last widely accepted confirmed sighting came on December 28, 1907, in the Tararua Range, though there were later claims. The final photographs show captive or recently killed birds, and in each image the difference between male and female bills feels almost impossibly refined. The moral close writes itself. Evolution can produce beauty of exquisite precision, and human demand can erase it with equal precision. Number 12. The Paradise Parrot. This Australian parrot carried colors so intense that early observers struggled to describe them without sounding theatrical. Green back, scarlet shoulder, turquoise face, and a warm golden brown head, all packed into a bird that nested in termite mounds. That alone would be enough to remember it. It lived in grassy woodland in Queensland, but overgrazing reduced ground cover, altered fire patterns changed habitat, and shooting added pressure. Therefore, the species declined almost unnoticed. The last confirmed live bird was seen in 1927, near Gayndah, Queensland. A famous photograph from 1922 shows a male perched in profile, bright and self-contained, as if the continent still had room for him. What happened next was not what anyone expected. For years, hope rested on rumors from remote grazing country, but the silence held. Number 11. The ivory-billed woodpecker of Cuba. This bird was enormous for a woodpecker, with bold black and white plumage and a pale bill that flashed in the forest. The Cuban population, sometimes treated as its own form or very close relative, lived in old-growth woodland where it pried into dead timber for beetle larvae. It was not a shy idea from a field guide. It was a loud, dramatic bird of large forests. But logging shattered those forests, and collecting pressure finished many survivors. By the late 20th century, the Cuban form was almost certainly gone, with the last widely accepted records in the 1980s. The photographs and specimens we have feel both modern and ancient, because the species survived almost into the age of satellite imagery, yet still slipped away. Yet the question remains. Few extinct birds have inspired more argument about whether some fragment might still exist undetected. Number 10. The round island burrowing boa. It was a snake that spent much of its life hidden underground on a tiny island near Mauritius, with reduced eyes and a secretive lifestyle that made it seem older than the modern world. Round Island itself was once a refuge for unusual reptiles and plants, but goats and rabbits introduced to the island destroyed vegetation, eroded soil, and transformed the habitat. Therefore, even burrowing animals lost the conditions they needed. The last confirmed specimen of this boa was collected in 1975, and repeated searches later found none. Because it was so seldom photographed alive, the surviving images carry a peculiar weight. You are looking at a species that may have spent most of its life out of sight, even before people pushed it over the edge. The hope twist lies in the island itself. Restoration efforts removed invasive mammals, and other rare species there have recovered. Number 9. The puli. This Hawaiian honeycreeper was only described by science in 1973, which means the modern world met it just as it was vanishing. It had a black face mask, soft brown body, and a pale underside, moving through the wet forests of Maui in very low numbers from the beginning of its known history. Habitat damage by pigs and goats, invasive mosquitoes, and avian malaria drove the collapse. Therefore, a bird unknown to science for most of human history disappeared in full view of conservation biology. By the late 1990s, only 3 remained. The last known individual vanished after 1904, following failed attempts to pair it with the final females. The final photographs show a bird that does not look doomed at all. It looks newly discovered. Here's where the story gets strange. The species entered the scientific record and the extinction record within one human lifetime. Number 8. The Pinta Island Tortoise. Lonesome George became famous precisely because giant tortoises are supposed to represent endurance, not endings. He was the last known Pinta Island tortoise, a distinct Galapagos form shaped by isolation over immense time. His island had once supported tortoises in a dry volcanic landscape, but sailors and whalers took many for food and introduced goats' devastated vegetation. George was found in 1971 on Pinta Island and brought into protection. For decades, breeding attempts failed. He died on June 24, 2012, at the Galapagos National Park Breeding Center on Santa Cruz Island. You may have seen his photographs. He stands with that ancient, patient expression tortoises seem to wear, making the idea of finality harder to accept. The hope twist is real. Genetic work has found tortoises on nearby islands carrying Pinta ancestry, which means part of George's lost lineage may yet be drawn back into living form. Number 7. The Western Black Rhinoceros. It was a browser of shrubs and woody plants, with a prehensile upper lip able to grasp leaves and twigs with delicate strength. Once it moved through parts of Cameroon and neighboring regions, Heavy-bodied but surprisingly agile in rough country, but poaching for horn intensified through the late 20th century, while weak enforcement and political instability made protection fail where it mattered most. Surveys in the early 2000s found almost nothing. The last confirmed records are from Cameroon in 2006. And in 2011, the International Union for Conservation of Nature declared the western black rhinoceros extinct. The last photographs show a living rhinoceros in scrubland, massive and self-possessed, with no sign that bureaucratic extinction is only a few years away. The moral close is hard to escape. A species can survive the rifle for decades, but not the market behind it. Number 6. The baiji. This freshwater dolphin lived in the Yangtze River and navigated a world of murky water by sound, not sight. It had a long, narrow beak and a low, triangular fin, and for centuries it shared one of Asia's great rivers with people, boats, and legend. But ship strikes, entanglement in fishing gear, habitat degradation, and noise from rapid industrial development overwhelmed it. Therefore, a dolphin adapted to one river system had nowhere else to go. A large survey in 2006 failed to find any, and the species was declared functionally extinct. One of the last authenticated photographs from the wild shows a pale body breaking the surface of brown water, almost dissolving back into it as you look. Some believe a few survived longer in remote stretches or side channels. Others are not convinced. In a loud river, disappearance can happen quietly. Number 5. The Pyrenean ibex. This mountain goat was built for cliffs, weather, and narrow ledges where hooves mattered more than speed. It survived in the Pyrenees as the last representative of its line, even after related ibex populations disappeared elsewhere in Iberia. But overhunting, competition with livestock, and disease drove it down until one female remained. Her name was Celia. She was last photographed alive in the Ordesa and Monte Perdido National Park in Spain, and on January 6, 2000, she was found dead beneath a fallen tree. The species was declared extinct that year. Yet here is the twist. In 2003, scientists cloned a Pyrenean ibex from preserved cells, and the kid was born alive before dying minutes later from lung defects. It was the first extinct animal ever briefly returned, which means Celia became both an ending and the beginning of a new and uneasy chapter. Number 4. The dusky seaside sparrow. This was a small bird of Florida salt marshes, dark-streaked and local. The kind of species many people would pass without noticing if not told its story. But it had its own song, its own habitat, and a range so narrow that changes in water management could undo it. Mosquito control flooding, drainage projects linked to space center development, and habitat destruction cut the population apart. By the late 1970s, only one male remained. His name was Orange Band, after the marker placed on his leg by researchers. He died on June 17, 1987, at the Discovery Island facility at Walt Disney World. The final photos show a plain sparrow on a branch. That is exactly why they are devastating. Extinction is not reserved for creatures that look legendary. Number 3. The Christmas Island pipistrelle. It was a tiny bat that hunted insects in the evening air of an island in the Indian Ocean, using echolocation to map darkness in bursts of sound. For years it seemed secure enough, a small native mammal in a place better known for crabs and seabirds. But invasive species, disease, and ecological disruption drove a sharp decline that scientists tracked in real time. By 2009, only one individual was being detected. A lone bat recorded on acoustic monitoring passes. Captive rescue came too late. The last confirmed detection was on August 26, 2009, on Christmas Island. There is almost no emotionally famous final photograph, which somehow makes the ending colder. The last record was largely sound. The moral close is stark. Sometimes the final witness to a species is not a camera, but a machine listening into the dark. Number 2. The Rab's fringe-limbed tree frog. This frog looked almost unreal, with large eyes and long fringed limbs suited to life in the canopy. It came from Panama and had one of the strangest known parental behaviors among frogs, because males guarded eggs and may even have helped tadpoles feed on skin secretions. If that sounds improbable, it was real. But chytrid fungus, a lethal wildlife disease spreading through amphibian populations, devastated the species before science could secure it. By the late 2000s, only a few captives remained. The last known individual, Tuffy, died on September 26, 2016, at the Atlanta Botanical Garden. His photographs show a dark, elegant frog clinging to a branch, alive with detail that now has nowhere to go. Here is the hope twist. Tuffy's preserved genetic material may yet matter if future reproductive technology for amphibians improves. Number 1. The Kauaʻi. This Hawaiian songbird ended not with a photograph, but with a sound. The male was glossy black with yellow leg tufts and once belonged to a forest world rich in honey-feeding birds found nowhere else on Earth. Disease carried by introduced mosquitoes, habitat loss, and invasive predators erased that world piece by piece. By the 1980s, one male remained in the Kauaʻi wilderness on Kauaʻi. In 1987, researchers recorded his call. You can hear him sing, then pause, then sing again into silence, calling for a female that would never answer. The species was declared extinct in the early 21st century after years without confirmed sightings. The real mystery is different. A final photograph can be terrible, but a final voice is worse because it lets you hear a creature still behaving, as if the world that made it has not already ended. These images and recordings do not just show what disappeared. They show how recently the living world was larger, stranger, and less lonely than the one we inherited.